Okay, thank you for having us. My name is Ioanna Spentza, and together with another two colleagues from the American College of Greece, we tried to go for something like a study, intervention, find answers about different ways that students can actually keep notes. I think that there are multiple ways with which you can actually help them out, but in reality, everything, or to some point, okay, to some extent, it will go back to how they keep notes of the material that you're presenting, whether this is a simple lecture note, PowerPoints and that's it, or if it extends to us just simply lecturing without anything at the back. Even more important, I think, in this case, when it comes to note-taking, or if we go for audiovisual presentations, whatever you're actually giving them or you're feeding them during the lecture, one way or another, I think that's, we all know that the how they keep notes matters extensively to the end results. Okay, so I think that, we can agree that the majority of our class, hopefully, fingers crossed, they do keep notes out of what they're actually being presented. And hopefully, the more interested they are, the more notes they keep. And I think that we can all understand that the process of note-taking indeed will enhance performance at the end, so whether this is short-term or long-term effects, okay? And, the reason and the rationale behind all this intervention like that we tried to hold and see what comes back out of it is the fact that we tend to see a very big variability on how they do keep notes. Okay, I think we are way, way past the approach of simple pen and paper. Okay, even ourselves, so much for our students who are much, much younger, we are way, way and very far away from just using the notebook. I'm not saying, do not get me wrong, that there are no students who still do not go for it. I do so, okay, together with other means whenever I want, to keep a record of something. But in reality, we see more and more mediums involved in the process. And I think that we need somehow to understand or to accommodate the extent to which they can indeed equate traditional note-taking. Maybe they do it better than we used to do it. So we need to understand what works best nowadays, that technology is so much embedded on what we do, everything of what we do, and see if there is something that we can actually, promote or advise in order to, let's say, go for more, for better consolidation eventually of all the material presented. Now, before I proceed a bit with what we did and what is, let's say, the whole logic behind it, exactly due to this variability, we've tried as a team to actually group the different note-taking procedures because they hold different approaches, both theoretically and on the kind of outcome they actually achieve. And we try to group them as typical and non-typical procedures. I think that you can guess that the longhand, laptop, and tablet-based will belong to the typical or most frequent, if you prefer, modes of taking notes. But, it is very increasing nowadays that we start seeing students using their smartphones for capturing lecture-related information. Not in the form of, just typing or keeping the notes on their phones, but rather more to the essence of possibly taking picture of the material or recording it or videotaping it. I think that you all know how embedded the whole concept of presenting short videos is within education nowadays. So why not employ it? Okay, and they do so within the whole note-taking procedure. So we tried to differentiate between the typical and the non-typical. By no means, I don't want to suggest, that the use of smartphones can be equated in terms of frequency as a laptop-based or a longhand approach, okay? But it is still there. And given the diverse theoretical background on how, let's say, what are the outcomes out of each one, we try to somehow investigate under two different interventions, okay? The extent to which we see differences in terms of the use of technology and short-term effects, okay? There is research, okay? There are evidence there. They're highly contradictory. There are aspects that are highly unexplored, okay? But eventually we want to dig a bit deeper to see what works best for our students and hopefully push it towards this direction. Now, before I proceed with the first intervention, I want to make a very brief clarification. I don't want to burden you too much with the theory. But, whenever we actually keep notes, there are two processes that we need to have in our minds, what we call the process function and what we call the product function. Now, this whole contradiction and under-exploration of the field relates more to the process function, how you encode information, and more short-term effects. So what can happen in a practical exercise or a surprise quiz right after the lecture or at the very end, how they can consolidate using application exercises, okay? Whereas the case of the product function, what's going to happen long-term in a final exam after a year or two, okay, it is definitely highly important. Maybe someone can argue that it is more important than a process function, okay, but it is so severely explored and it is so robust that when you take notes of any kind, eventually you're going to have a better result in terms of, consolidation and retrieval, that I think that's, it comes as too much to keep on going through all this direction. So we wanted to somehow highlight what they can do during encoding that can definitely help them very, very much short term, and it will do so definitely long term. Okay, this is, let's say, that we take it as an established approach. All right. Now, exactly because there is diverse theoretical evidence and approach when it comes to typical versus non-typical note-taking procedures, we split into interventions. So we explored separately the typical and non-typical approaches in terms of immediate performance to see what is going on. Now, we started with the non-typical cases, the smartphone use. I think that you all know that we have various evidence when it comes to, the role of smartphone in terms of distraction, the fact that it might have detrimental effects when it is used in parallel to attending to a lecture, but not related to the lecture per se. There is, as I said before, in the past couple of years, a tendency to see smartphones more and more being involved in the lecture related tasks, okay? But the majority, let's say, of evidence that exists is for non-related lecture material, where it is very, very clear that we see an impairment of performance when we have a distraction or when we engage in multitasking, use of smartphone, or social media, scrolling, anything, okay, it is definitely a multitasking component or a distractor there. For the lecture-related use of smartphone, which is, let's say, the heat of our intervention, we have the contradictory evidence, as I said before. So we have two categories, let's say, of evidence so far. The one that says that it's highly beneficial. So there is a benefit when you actually photograph the lecture-related material, and there is an aspect where it says that it is better to just observe or to keep longhand notes instead of photographing, because eventually this leads to impairments, okay? And this is, let's say, more supported by the photo-taking impairment effect. It is related extensively also to the concept of offloading, so I'm just relying on the fact that something else keeps the information for me, so I do not need to do it, all right? And given the very, very robust approach of the cognitive offloading, we expected a bit that the smartphone, although we have evidence that it might be helpful in some occasions, it's not going to happen in our, let's say, kind of intervention. So we thought that students eventually will not be helped out of taking photographs of the lecture-related material. Now, video-oriented, because we try to incorporate the video components within our intervention, the reality is that there are almost no evidence of what is going on. I find it rather, interesting and peculiar with how videos are embedded in everyday life and in lecture-oriented stuff. I'm guessing that if not almost all of you, at one way or another, they do present videos. So we have this proneness towards learning through this approach. So why not use it, okay, to actually, help it for us to take notes and review it later on, all right? So we addressed the photo-taking component. We said that's not going to work in their favor. And we, at the same time, believe that or supported that when it comes to the video, it's going to be more beneficial than the photo-taking. It has to do with attention. It works better, at least from what we know from other studies non-related to lecture material. Therefore, we expect that overall observation will be the best possible approach in terms of performance. And then definitely worse performance for the photos versus the observation, or the videos versus the observation, with the video being a bit more, let's say, prominent, at least based on our expectations. Now, very briefly, we had a sample of 110 students, okay, with a brief 6-slide presentation created that had a follow-up surprise quiz, let's say, multiple choice, controlling for representation of ideas from the lecture notes and difficulty, okay. I want to rely mostly and discuss mostly about the results of the intervention in order to move on and have a more comprehensive discussion at the end. The interesting part was that our expectations were indeed partly confirmed. So indeed, participants and students, when they observe, they do better at the end, okay, in comparison to using non-typical note-taking procedures like photo taking or videotaping. However, what interests us, let's say, the most was that there were no differences in performance between the photo taking and the videotaping. So in reality, the whether you actually keep on capturing that involves an attentional disengagement, all right, does not make a difference on whether you actually just videotape. It's supposed to hold more of attentional resources in the task at hand, okay? So there is definitely, at least from what we have found, a disruption of with the use of a smartphone for lecture-related stuff, okay? We have attributed these results, which is something that I mentioned before for our expectations, to the case of loading. So the fact that we can rely that we can always actually find information stored somewhere and we don't need to actually use actively our brain to do so, to some extent impairs how we encode the information. So either you do not, so you prevent, of course, consolidation and retrieval, or you partly encode. And in my opinion, and based on what we know theoretically, when you partly encode, I think that it is even more risky than when you do not encode at all. Because partly encoding means that you have traces, and traces means that eventually students, in a way, make up their own knowledge, okay, accurate or non-accurate. In the majority of the cases, I'll say that it's not going to be accurate. So this, disrupts even more the learning process and how you can communicate effectively ideas. However, there are many plausible explanations. I don't want to elaborate too much on that end, but I really want to address a bit what we know theoretically as the mere presence effect. And we discussed it further as a matter of the second intervention that we held. There is this mere presence of technological means, in our case, the smartphone, that we know that theoretically disrupts. So based on this approach, our expectations together with the offloading hypothesis is something that it is let's say, expected. It is something that it is valid in this direction. So this eventually this intervention, although we had from the very, very beginning decided to compare the typical versus the non-typical, gave rise to even more interests for this second intervention that embedded the tablets and the laptops when it comes to note-taking, because it would give us the opportunity to see what is going on, especially with the presence of technological means during note-taking, because someone would very logically think, although there is no, let's say, solid evidence on this direction, that from the moment that I have the laptop in front of me or I have the tablet in front of me, in the same way as when I have my smartphone in front of me, this should disrupt the process. And as you will see in a minute, theoretically and empirical evidence-wise, this is not there, and we'll see what actually we managed to extract out of our intervention. So moving to the second intervention, that of exploring the typical, as we said before, note-taking behaviors, we tried to make an exploration of what happens between longhand, between laptop-based note-taking, and including the tablet note-taking procedures. I think that you all know that the longhand and the laptop are considered even more typical cases. The laptop is newly emerging or newer in comparison to the rest, at least, within the field of note-taking, especially with the use of an artificial pen. I don't think that it is more than 5-6 years that this is actually happening. So you can understand that, the whole research that might possibly exist on why it is beneficial. Do they do better? Do they gain out of this process? Is severely underdeveloped. So similarly to the first intervention, we went down this road as a second go for the typical cases of note-taking, exactly because evidence is very, very contradictory. So it seems that in reality, although it might be simplistic, we don't have an answer on what to propose to our students, which is the optimal way. Is it person-specific, what suits everyone best? There is no evidence in this direction. Is there use your smartphones? No, someone can argue both. In favor, against. Is it a pen and paper that we use to now up to date? Again, we cannot answer, because in the case of typical note-taking procedures, we have even greater discrepancies. It is as if we have all the evidence splits in 3 different directions, one supporting a very, very strong longhand superiority effect. So it is pen and paper, it is a traditional approach, go for it, this will give you the best results. There is an approach that supports heavily the laptop and the superiority of the laptop, with evidence, okay, that it allows students to go better when they keep notes on the laptop. And there is this third part of the story that shows no difference at all. So practically, it shows you that if you keep notes one way or another, whether you use the pen or whether you use the laptop, it's going to be beneficial, so go for it. And there comes the tablets, where, as I said before, severely underexplored. There is, let's say, the approach that it mimics the handwritten approach, so the longhand. And I think that's, eventually does it. This is the point, because the tablet is a very, very unique case. It is a technological medium. So someone can equate it with a smartphone or a laptop, but in reality, it mimics what you do when you actually hold a pen and paper. You follow the same approach. So where does it actually stand? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it the same as the laptop because technology wins over? Or is this the same as the longhand because it mimics to that extent that it is as if you're writing in a pen and paper? And this practically, all this discussion, all these questions gave rise to the second intervention. And in reality, we leaned more towards the approach that if you go longhand or if you go tablet with artificial pen, you're going to go better. Solely due to, the approach, or from one, let's say, direction, due to the deeper level of processing that you might engage. There is the approach that due to transcription speeds, maybe laptop can go better, but at least cognitively oriented, I think that, the deeper the level of processing, the better the encoding, the consolidation, and the retrieval at the end. Hence, our expectations there. So within this intervention, just to weaken up a bit the details, we had 155 students spread across different note-taking mediums. We used a video lecture-related material instead of the simple PowerPoint presentation, again with multiple choice questions, surprise test at the end, always controlling for representativeness of ideas and difficulty, as I said before. So all aspects were pretty much the same, apart from the changes in terms of note-taking procedures. And I think that's, this intervention paid out in a way in terms of interest, because there were no differences, nothing. Whether you keep the notes, let's say, using pen and paper or laptop or tablet, they seem to go equally well. So it doesn't make a difference. And, this intrigued us very, very much, because, in reality, does this approach of, having a technological mean that interferes in the same way as the smartphone seem to do actually happen? The answer is no. Because when the student uses the laptop or when the student uses the tablet, this approach of the mere presence and the fact that it is interrupting, it doesn't seem to be there. So we need somehow to understand that there is technological adaptation, there is technological change, there is, let's say, we have an embedded predisposition to use tablets or laptops towards note-taking. It doesn't seem to disrupt us in the same way as smartphones does. We can no longer assume that the traditional approach of longhand is indeed so optimal in terms of keeping notes. It doesn't seem to offer this extra advantage over encoding and therefore potential retrieval. Okay, I think that's, we need somehow to understand and communicate. Maybe the students have already done so, but for those who maybe haven't realized, the change in terms of technology and the use of AI and everything, it's there. And it's not coming anymore. It is here, and interventions and evidence and explorations practically. And I think that everyone experiences it within your classroom. It's actually happening. So let's try to adapt and let's try to promote students down this road and this direction. And as a last very, very important comment from my side, let's try to explore, and this is where we're trying to, let's say, go with our team. Let's try to explore what is the real, let's say, role of smartphones, because they seem to deviate in terms of approach from a laptop or a tablet, although they share so many characteristics. They seem to deviate, so they do not hold the same value for us. There is, this social value, this tendency of ours to think that we use them for other purposes. So let's not try to throw, everything into the bin and let's say, end up with the conclusion that I can use anything to take notes. No, there is an equation, okay? There is an equilibrium between pen and paper and laptops and everything, but this doesn't mean that any kind of medium can actually help me in this direction. So we need somehow to communicate that to the students and ensure that, within the classroom, there is kind of a controlled process that, yes, feel free to go for what works best, okay? Is it the traditional approach? Is it the fact that you can type quicker when it is a laptop? But let's, at least with caution, there is more to come, definitely, okay? But with caution, let's try to ensure that they move away a bit from the smartphones. And we do too for other kind of, exposure in terms of, information from colleagues or conferences or everything. Let's try to move a bit away. I think it doesn't work the same way as the rest.